Hello, good afternoon, good evening, good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's live stream. My name is Pooja Mistry. I am here with some amazing people, Kinlane, Deepa, Rebecca, Damien. Today is a full house here at the Postman live streams. And today we're going to be diving into some of the current state and the future state of APIs. So before we do that, I'd love to go around the room and have everyone introduce themselves. And yeah, before let's get this show on the road.
All
Yeah,
right,
Dave.
sounds great. I'll start. My name is Rebecca Johnston Gilbert, and I've been with Postman, over 3.5 years now, which is such an amazing place to be. And I head up marketing ops, and I'll toss it to my colleague here.
Hi, I'm Deepa. I actually recently joined Postman only about 3 months ago. And previously, I was at PayPal, and before that, I was at Twilio. I have been an API product manager for a number of years now, and I'm leading the product strategy here at Postman.
Amazing.
Hey, I'm
Damien?
Hi guys. I'm Damian McLean, and I'm the content lead here at Postman. I played a key role in putting together the findings in the state of the API report, and am really excited to talk about those findings with everyone today.
And I'm Ken Lane. I'm Chief Evangelist here at Postman. I've been here about almost 3 years now, chasing Rebecca, but I can't seem to catch her in the amount of time I've been here. But I help talk about the API lifecycle and governance, lead our developer relations, and our overall Postman open technologies work.
Amazing. Yeah, I'm so happy to be here with such a great crew. And we've done a lot of work here, especially with the state of API reports. We've had thousands of people take this survey, so lots of really great key insights. I'd love to have everyone let us know where they're joining from in the chat. If it seems like we have people joining from all over the world, we are also a distributed, diverse team on multiple different time zones. So we'd love to get some insight from you as well. But before we get started on today's deep dive into the state of the APIs, I wanted to do this segment called In Case You Missed It. So a couple of announcements before we just jump right in. So in case you missed it, so if we are now announcing the Postman partner ecosystem. So this has just been announced not too long ago, just this month. So be on a lookout for some partner programs and partner ecosystems, especially if you are in the API first space. And there's multiple ways to have integrate with Postman. So definitely check out this blog and get company to the existing partner program that we have. We have lots of different partnerships that have come out. Even in the last couple of months, I think we announced partnerships with like GitHub and New Relic and lots of different things coming out from Postman here. And then if everyone wants to know, V10 is actually coming soon. So version 10 of Postman it's on its way. It's coming very soon. So make sure you join the waitlist and find out what some of the new features there are. We have partner workspaces. We have gRPC support. Lots of amazing features for security and governance. So definitely take a look at V10 if you've worked with Postman quite a bit. And yeah, I'm happy to drop some of these links in the comment section as we go through. But I'd like to kind of take this time and dive into basically what we're talking about today, which is the state of the API report. So with that said, I wanted to actually hand it over and talk to both Rebecca and Damien to kind of dive a little bit deeper into what exactly this report is for, and why are we talking about this, and why we decided to get all this data and metrics in the first place.
Yeah, Thanks, Pooja. I'll kind of get started, and Damien can provide some more details. So, why the heck do we do this report? It's really to give us a true state of what's happening with APIs, kind of throughout the entire industry, and understand, how folks are approaching their work. What are their challenges? What do they what are some of their obstacles, what do they see as opportunities, and just provide this very broad view. And we're incredibly grateful to obviously there's a very large community of 20 million developers who use Postman. A lot of those folks participated, of course. So we've actually been doing this report this is the 4th year that it has been the largest and most comprehensive survey and report on APIs. And actually, this year's was the biggest ever, with over 37,000 participants. So just allows us to analyze the data and find some really, really interesting things that we'll be talking about today at a deep level. And I think what's interesting too, and we'll talk about this a little bit more, is it's not just developers, right, who are working with APIs. There's so many, other professionals who are working with APIs as well. So, Damien, perhaps add some more kind of color and context on that as well, please.
Sure, absolutely, Rebecca. So as Rebecca, as you noted, there's 37,000 respondents for this survey, but about half of them are developers, and the other half are people who are maybe work in tech or work adjacent to tech. Those could be people who are business analysts. They could be people who work in customer success, but they all are people who work with APIs. And in fact, this year, when we asked our survey participants how long they had been working with APIs, we found that about 16% of them had less than a year's worth of experience working with APIs. Quite a few newcomers, people who are very interested in APIs and looking to learn more. Just by comparison, last year, we had just about 1 in 4 people who had less than a year's experience. So APIs are attracting not only people who are seasoned developers, but people who are non-developers who are learning to work with APIs in their role.
Yeah. And so how did you guys end up creating this report, and what kind of topics and findings did you think that would be useful when it came to getting some of this data?
Ooh, good question. Damien, you can take that, or I can, up to you.
Yeah, sure. So, well, this year we really wanted to build on some of the questions we've asked last year, which have been very enlightening. Those are questions such as, what platforms and tools do you use? How many hours a week, for example, do you spend on APIs? What percentage of your development efforts at your company or organization are devoted to APIs? This year, we also wanted to ask a few other questions, and we asked all of our respondents just how they viewed the economy currently, wherever they happen to be, and what sort of investments they expected would be made over the coming year in APIs. Also, we wanted to know how does the landscape look over the next year as far as hiring goes, as far as internal spending, as far as retaining good employees. And so those are all questions that we wanted to ask as well, because they're very relevant right now, given that the economy is in, let's just say, a state of uncertainty in many parts of the world. And we also wanted to ask dig a little deeper into the question of remote work. Mm-hmm. That's a question that the tech sector is having a very robust discussion around, especially as many companies encourage employees to return to the office, and many employees are pushing back. So we wanted to explore attitudes and opinions on remote work as well, which we'll talk about a little bit today.
Yeah, definitely. So one thing that I see when I first look at this report are some of these 6 key findings. So it seems like we've surveyed a lot of different developers. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about who exactly did we survey, and what were the backgrounds and personas of the people that were part of this report.
So generally, when we think about APIs, we often think that it's developers, but there's actually a lot of other personas that also work with APIs, because developers don't work in isolation. There's a lot of different roles that work alongside them, and that's something we did see in the survey. We saw we saw people who are directors or CEOs or people who are product managers. We saw customer success, support, solution architects, sales is also a pretty important persona that we noticed. And I think one of the new ones that I saw was the data and business analyst persona. So it's really interesting to see how sometimes our own idea of like, oh, APIs means developers, but in reality, there's a lot of other personas, and it gets really interesting when we look beyond the roles too.
Yeah,
Is start to look at demographics. We notice that it is still well, one of the things that really stood out to me was that it's still 85% male
right,
dominated. So I think for me that was a sign to say, hey, we need to do something to get more women, get more non-binary people enabled to participate in this
right.
conversation.
Right, definitely. One of the key findings that I found here was developers are spending most of their time on APIs. So I wanted to pull up one of the key findings that I saw. So, for example, the development effort that is here, I saw that there was uh, the number of hours and time spent. So does anyone want to chime in on like some of these stats as well, like how much time is spent when creating APIs?
Sure.
Yeah, oh, yep, no, take it,
Sure.
Damien.
Sure. Okay. So, as the text says on the screen, which
Yeah,
people may or may not be able to read, this year, 51% of respondents said that most of their organization's development effort was spent on APIs. So that's a rise over the last 2 years. In 2020, it was just 40% who said that most of
hmm,
their org's development effort was spent on APIs. It was 49% last year, and this year it's actually crossed over the 50% mark. So, and this comes, this is sort of a testimony to the fact that APIs are increasingly building blocks of modern software. And also we have companies increasingly using APIs for internal and external products and services. And we dig a little bit deeper into what services maybe these companies and organizations are using APIs for when we
right,
ask them exactly how they're using APIs and what their approach is to APIs.
right. And then I also noticed that the investments, API investments, have remained really strong despite headwinds. So some of the things that I've noticed that I wanted to point out in this is like the APIs and future work. It seems like this is a landscape that is still growing. So I'd love to get some thoughts on that as well.
Yeah.
I
Oh, yeah, go for it.
no, go ahead, Rebecca.
Oh, yeah. So it's really interesting, right? Like, so we asked folks, like, hey, what do you think about the economy? And generally, folks were not very positive on the economic outlook. But despite that, we asked, like, hey, are you going to invest more in APIs, like more time, more resources, more dollars? Is it going to stay the same, or are you going to invest less? And just increasingly, or I shouldn't say increasingly, but we saw this really kind of continued steady rise and focus on APIs because it enables, so many other development efforts that I'm sure Ken Lane can provide, kind of more context on, having had a front row seat to all of this for many years.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, yeah. The growth in APIs. I mean, I've been watching it for about 12 years solid now, but the last couple of years and just watching this report kind of showcase that is pretty mind blowing as far as the volume at which we're seeing out there.
Yeah, definitely. And I know that Kin has worked quite heavily in the API space and has talked to quite a lot of different personas. And Deepa is actually one of the personas that she's talked to. So he has a podcast here called Breaking Changes podcast. So I just wanted to give a shout out to one of Deepa's episodes about product managers and APIs needs. So I'd love to talk to you, Deepa, a little bit more about what do we know about the people working in the API space, and describe personas specifically in the large teams as well. So I wanted to pull up a little bit of metrics here as well about who works with APIs as we kind of dive into that a little bit as well.
Yeah, absolutely. If you pull up to the first chart that shows the distribution of the roles, that one's really interesting. You can see, of course, majority of the people are developers, so that's definitely the major persona. But we do see a lot of other personas that are managers, product managers, and like I mentioned earlier, sales teams, support teams, customer success. So as more and more organizations start to think about building APIs, they also need all these functions to support that initiative. So you do actually need product managers to understand how to build API products. You need them to be able to work with your developers. You need customer success teams if you're going to roll out API products. You need sales. So all of these teams do need enablement, and the companies that are already doing it, mostly enterprise, that is already publishing APIs for monetized APIs and for mass consumption. They already have these functions. We already see these personas represented in the user base, and it is growing over the years. uh, the awareness around APIs as products, the awareness around extending our definition of developer, because in a lot of ways, I think developer itself is not necessarily somebody who codes, but now we're also seeing a lot of developers who use no code, low code tooling, and they are also working with APIs. So the definition of developer is expanding. There's roles around developers who are working with APIs. And in enterprise space, we're seeing more and more need to create a product development process around building APIs.
Yeah, definitely. I actually wanted to point out this global growth of APIs as well, because it seems like, this has kind of exploded all over the world. So I'd love to dive a little bit deeper in some of these metrics as well. Deepa, Damien, Rebecca, feel free to chime in on any of the global efforts that are happening.
Sure. I can get started here, of course. And so I think what's fascinating is, and, almost a little bit like Ken, Postman itself, has obviously had this, has this great, API platform for building and using APIs. And we've seen our global growth just, explode with, reaching over 20 million developers earlier this year. So,
Yes.
and I think what's really interesting is it's truly a global movement. We've seen, and some geographies even growing perhaps faster than others. Some, interestingly, we're starting to see some trends around what the most popular APIs are. And maybe Damien, if you want to provide a few more details there, that'd be great.
Sure, be happy to. So when we take a look at APIs just globally, we definitely find that it's the USA and India that really are in the lead as far as number of collections created, the number of requests created. India is growing spectacularly fast, and we see that throughout the survey. Mentioned it sort of borne out in a number of ways. One interesting little tidbit is that when we asked our respondents globally about how confident they were that investment into APIs would grow over the coming year, we found that 53% of respondents globally said that they expected investments into APIs to increase. But in India, it was much higher. In fact, it was the highest of all the G20 countries. 61% of respondents in India expected that investments into APIs would continue to grow. And so it really is just sort of a little data point, showing that India is actually is really in many ways innovating and taking the lead in some ways when it comes to APIs and investments, and also just the number of collections and, of course, requests created. And I see we have some
Well,
people here on the call, which is really nice to see too, because I know it's 8:30 or 9 o'clock there probably.
Yeah, definitely.
and to add to what Damien said about collections, because at the top of that, you see there's 38 million collections created, and then we've rolled over 1 billion requests. But then if you scroll down to the bottom of the page, Deepa, and show, like, it's not just those popular APIs. Keep going. There you go. Show the platform diagram.
Yeah.
It's actually testing. It's different stops along the API lifecycle. You're seeing collection usage feed into this growth. So it's not just consuming Salesforce and Twilio and automating as an API consumer. We're actually using collections to test, to document, to mock, and secure, and deliver across the API lifecycle. And that's what this diagram here represents. Is the cornerstone is very much integrating with source control, our CI/CD solutions, our gateways, and our APMs. But if you look in the center there, there's many other stops along the API lifecycle that collections are being used, being used to service. So it's both sides of the producer and the consumer lifecycle that we're seeing this global growth.
Definitely. Yeah. And it seems like, especially with Postman, we kind of have all of our fingers and all of the processes of the API lifecycle, as well as like different ways to integrate with other services as well. So, speaking of like the API lifecycle, I'd love to kind of get a deeper insight on just, you know, how what the current landscape kind of looks like from you, Kin, if you've
Yeah.
have any
Yeah.
insight
I
on that.
mean, I
Yeah.
kind of echo what Deepa was saying about the
Mhm.
increased roles. And staying on this diagram that we're looking at here, is there's just more people involved. And if you
Mhm.
look at the kind of the leadership aspect of this, the leadership and governance is more folks are feeling like leaders are involved and have an opinion on this. And actually, so there's more top down um, uh, leadership getting on board with APIs. It's not just a bottom up. Developers get it. Those 20 million developers that you see Postman has, they understand the importance of APIs and why they matter to in their work. But the significant shift over the last couple of years is now leadership's on board with that, and that's around the globe. So we're having, I mean, this is what I spend most of my time doing, is talking to product managers, engineering managers, architects, and CTOs, CIOs about why APIs are mattering, and what this growth looks like across their organizations, because they're reading the state of the API report. They're seeing the numbers of Postman users in their organization grow, and then that's helping them see the API landscape and have it come more into view for them, and they're realizing they need to get more strategic in how they approach it.
Definitely.
Hey, Ken, actually, Pooja, if it's okay, I'll ask a question to Ken.
Yeah.
So, Ken, what do you think instigated this shift in increasing interest from leadership in APIs? I would say both technical and business leadership. What do you think changed that kind of made this whole thing, or kind of shifted that mindset?
Well, what I started tuning into last year on Breaking Changes and really kind of validated, I mean, Deepa's the physical representation of this validation. In January, I started noticing uh, just more discussion with product managers, more folks who weren't your classic developers. And Deepa and I have been diving into this for the last 6 months. Is what we have historically is an API lifecycle that's develop and deploy. It's a very developer led effort. You develop an API, you deploy it. And over the last 5 or 7 years, Postman has been kind of leading this way of design first. So now you design it before you develop it, you mock it, you document it, and kind of expanding on that life cycle to be a little wider. But along that way, many organizations realized that developer and IT led APIs were not meeting all of their needs, and not they were delivering interesting technical digital resources, but it wasn't always finding the alignment with business that was needed. And so we're seeing this life cycle continue to expand, where you have a define phase even before that design phase. And then once your API is deployed, you have an observe and a distribute phase. And what we're seeing is more business stakeholders coming into that conversation earlier on, as well as once an API is ready as part of that distribution phase. And so because of that business interest, because of that desire for business alignment, you're seeing a lot more business stakeholders involved in the life cycle, involved in the process, and it's just elevating it. And when it comes to the visibility across business stakeholders,
Definitely. And
If
then,
I can add
yeah.
to that, there's to answer your question, there are some external factors and there's some internal factors that have kind of led to this transition in business being more interested. Uh, and the external factors are mostly how there's this opportunity to monetize APIs to capture this market. So more and more companies are realizing that, hey, this is a big enough opportunity that we should invest in, and APIs can really expand the business. So that's the external opportunity. And the internal factor is developers have been making APIs for internal infrastructure for a very long time, but there's some key challenges that have kind of surfaced over the years as that has happened. For example, in large enterprises, you can have multiple teams develop pretty much the same functionality in different APIs. Both of them are MVPs. None of them is actually a finished product. So there is that need for more strategic thinking, more organizational strategy to building APIs rather than just engineers kind of using it as like uh, as a as a piece of infrastructure, but really thinking of it as products, having a bigger strategy, broader strategy around it, so that you can have a more scalable thought process around building APIs. And then, of course, so we think about internal APIs, we think about public APIs, but there's also a huge space in partner APIs. And
Mhm.
that's where companies are building strategic partnerships using API products. So that's another place where that thought process of just thinking of APIs as an engineering specific thing needs to broaden, get more people involved so that we can have high quality, we can have controls over what we're shipping, we can design experiences around it in terms of API experience, what documentation is good, how do we evaluate all these things, what's a good API, what's not a mature API. So defining all these things and having much more coherent thought process around it is needed to make the work of developers shine.
Yeah.
That's excellent point, Deepa. And I would just add one data point from the API survey, which sort of amplifies what you said about the importance of internal apps and systems and how APIs are integrating with them and performing functions and services. Just in the past year, the Postman API platform has seen the number of integrated APIs across enterprise teams jump 20-fold. And so we think probably what's happening, and just from talking to customers, is that increasingly APIs are replacing traditional methods like file transfer, database sharing, and email. And so those are all contributing to the increased interest in APIs beyond just developers who are creating products for external use.
Yeah. And go ahead, Ken.
I was gonna just augment that with I would say that internal growth is very positive and very important, and we're seeing just exponential growth in the number of internal APIs, microservices. But one thing I think, and maybe I'm wrong on this front, but we'll look at future reports to validate or not, is I think there's also a lot of pent up anxiety about partner and public APIs is why we're seeing that massive internal growth, because companies still have a lot of anxiety about making these digital resources available externally, and so they're just doubling down on investment on internal ones, but they don't always have that confidence to make them available to partners and to the public without feeling like they're giving away too much. So I'm reading the tea leaves a little bit, reading a little bit into it, but I kind of feel like we're going to see that number shift. We may still see continued growth internally, but I think we're going to see the partner and public explode in future ones, and we'll see if I'm right or wrong here.
That's interesting. Yeah, that's interesting. Now, Ken, so would that mean that we're going to see a different breakdown in the API report? We talk about public, partner, and private, and the different percentages they make up of all APIs. You expect to see the partner and the public percentages grow? You'd expect?
Yeah, I would say partner first. You're going to see next year a pretty beginning of a massive spike when it comes to partner growth, offsetting what we've seen with the internal this year. And then from that, you're going to see more confidence building with enterprises, and then you're going to see more public. But that'll probably, I'm guessing, about 4 or 5 years down the road before we see an explosion in public. But yeah, the next couple years will all be about partner growth.
Fantastic.
Yeah. And with that said, I wanted to dive a little bit into defining like API first. So I guess that's kind of what our bread and butter here is in terms of like what Postman does. But yeah, I'd love to have a conversation on API first and how you see companies evolve in that way.
Yeah, and maybe I can hop into some of the key findings, if you don't mind, Pooja, just around API first leaders, and then Ken, obviously having this like amazing first front row seat, can talk much more about what he's seeing. But I think what's really fascinating around API first is that folks who are embracing API first as a development model, who are organizing their entire organization around kind of going API first, are seeing, what we're detecting, what Damien detected, what we detected from the report, is that they're outperforming. And it's fascinating because we looked at it from a few different, angles. They are producing APIs faster. They are seeing fewer errors hit production when there is something that's, something goes awry in production. That actually, we're able to recover much faster. So just kind of fascinating, outperforming. And then we also asked some questions around, what folks thought about API first. And overwhelmingly, there were just a number of really interesting findings there as well that Damien can touch on more.
Happy to, yeah. So we asked people just to self-report on how API first their approach was when it came to development. We also asked them, just all survey respondents, what are your impressions of organizations that are API first? How well do they, how quickly do they produce software? What's your impression from the outside of API first companies? And so when we asked our respondents to identify themselves as extremely API first in their approach or not at all, what we found is that the respondents who were the most API first, that is ranking themselves as say a 9 or a 10 on a scale of 0 to 10, that they really enjoyed some benefits, as Rebecca just talked about. For example, being able to get right back up if, for example, an API failed, being able to restore it very quickly. For example, when an API fails, 38% of all respondents said they could get it back up within less than an hour. But the API first leaders, 44% of them were confident they could do it that quickly. So you do see a notable difference in their ability to really recover quickly. And these API first leaders also, they deploy more often. 38% of these API first leaders will deploy once a week or even more often, compared with say 28% for all respondents.
Yeah,
go ahead.
Yeah, so I was wondering, like, so that those metrics, I wanted to. Did you want me to point to a specific spot for that?
Yeah, that's a good idea. You can go to, let's see here. Just 1 second. I've got a couple screens going on. I'll tell you what. Yeah. It's so what you're looking at right now is this is the percentage of API for people who have and how they rank themselves as far as API first goes. But
right.
Let me just here. I'll pull up.
And I think, Damien, while you're working on pulling that page up, Ken, on Breaking Changes, you spend so much time talking with folks who are embracing API first. Kind of, share, if you don't mind, share more of your thoughts around the report, around API first, and kind of what you're seeing.
Yeah, fundamentally, it's a question I ask almost every guest and get their opinion. So it's really interesting to hear. But the common thread across it is folks are realizing that a composable enterprise is how you get business done today. So being able to prioritize your digital resources and capabilities and experiences over the applications of those. So you're able to get more stakeholders to the table, plan ahead. It's not always design first, but design first is an important component of API first. But most folks see it as just about prioritizing and defining and then properly designing and then having a life cycle that's shared in a common vocabulary across teams is what being API first is about. And this is what really feeds into a lot of what Damien was mentioning around recovering faster, being able to move quicker. Like the more stakeholders, business and technical, you have involved in the life cycle, able to do it, your communication is clear. Folks are used to doing this. It's proven practices and how they approach the life cycle. They just know what they're doing, and they can respond quicker to bad situations, and they can respond to market forces quicker. So it's I don't want to say it's not the API, but it's everything around the API that enables the API, and then once you deliver the API, the connections that it fires up.
Yeah.
And Pooja, to answer your question as to where you can find sort of the API first benefits broken out, what we've done is throughout the report, when we talk about things like time to deployment, time to recover, frequency of deployment, in each of those sections, many of those are, for example, under executing on APIs. In those sections, we also will make a point of mentioning how API first leaders perform compared to, say, the overall survey respondents. Yeah, for example, time to production. You'll see that API first leaders are faster when it comes to producing. 19% of these API first leaders are able to conceive, implement, test, and deliver an API within a day or less, compared to, say, 14% of all respondents. So these are people who are self-reporting, that is their experience. But if you go to the section of the report called API First and Other Strategies, I think you were just there a minute ago.
Yep.
And then scroll to the very bottom of the page, you'll see sort of a rainbow colored bar chart. Keep going. Yep. No more. That's the one. So, yep, right there. So what we did is we also wanted to know what is the view of API first leaders and API first organizations from the outside. So we said we asked them just to evaluate API first organizations that they knew about on a number of metrics, like how long does it take you to onboard, productivity, how quickly you can integrate with partners, how fast you can launch new products, and just general happiness. Are the developers happier? And we found that at least 75% of all respondents in the survey, this is 37,000 people surveyed, said that they agreed that the developers at API first companies are happier, launch new products faster, eliminate security risks sooner, and create better software, and are more productive. And so this was really, for us, this sort of bore out a lot of what we've seen with our customers, but it was really kind of gratifying to see that there was a recognition in the market that taking an API approach has some very visible benefits.
Yeah. And with that said, I feel like I wanted to dive a little bit into, like, when we talk about leadership, like thinking about people and personas in the enterprise space. So I know, Deepa, you've worked a lot with different personas in that space. So can you give us a little bit of insight into like the enterprise persona when it comes to APIs?
Yeah, absolutely. If you just scroll up, there's another interesting chart on this page. I think one more up. I think what matters. Yeah, that's the one.
Yep.
So when it comes to enterprise, and we think about API first leaders, the top four factors that they talked about was performance, security, reliability, and documentation. And right there, you can see that represents those things are taken care by different teams in most enterprise. So it's not just the developers. There is, for example, for security, the security team has to be involved in the process of development of APIs. And in terms of API lifecycle, you have to have the security review. We see that customers, API consumers, it's a very high priority for them to make sure that the APIs they're using or integrating with are secure. So security ends up being very important. Reliability is very important. And documentation, again, is experience. So that's where a lot of product management, developer relations, marketing ends up being really important in terms of like how do you present your APIs to the end customer? Is it usable? Is it how do people even get started? Because if it is from a design perspective, one aspect when we think about APIs is, are they intuitive? Can people understand the design of it? But then documentation really can enable developers to integrate quickly. So that's where, when we start to think about enterprise APIs, we see a lot more personas get engaged in the development as well as consumption of APIs. So on the producer side, we need all these security reviews and the strategy around like what the documentation looks like, what kind of quality it is usable.
Attention. Attention.
Ooh.
Oh,
Sorry,
An emergency has been reported on a floor above yours.
That's an announcement in our
Please
building.
be
We'll go on
prepared
mute.
to relocate.
Oh, wow. Okay.
They're in the office in downtown San Francisco, so it sounds like we have an issue.
Yes, and speaking of that, I think this totally transitions into remote work. And so, wow, okay. Well, I hope Deepa and Rebecca will be back soon, but since they are having some issues, well, I actually wanted to dive into one of the questions that we had from our chat. So one question that we had when we were talking about partner APIs and public APIs is basically the spike in public and partner APIs. What impact do we see on like API security concerns? So if anyone wants to dive into that question, feel free.
Yeah, happy to dive in. Do a lot of thinking on this. I just interviewed 42 Crunch last week. They do the API security.io newsletter, and the growth. This feeds into what I mentioned earlier about anxiety. Is folks just don't have a lot of awareness about the consistency of security across their APIs. And so because of that, they have a lot of anxiety about what's going out the door. And so what we're seeing at Postman is a greater investment in um, uh, security earlier on. So shifting left on API security. So rather than scanning and fuzzing APIs once they are in production, is standardizing the governance around how you design and develop your API. So you're thinking about security early on. You're defending against the OWASP top 10 when it comes to your APIs. So security is just a part of the conversation earlier on in the life cycle. All developers are exposed to OWASP top 10 and other common security vulnerabilities. So we're having a conversation and we're able to do more. But if you're only investing in internal APIs, then groups are not having the conversation about partner and public and security. There's often this false sense of security that, hey, this is an internal API, and groups are it's safe and secure because it's internal, and we don't have a problem. But that's that penned up expansion is that eventually many of these services are going to have to be exposed externally, and groups just don't always have the confidence. Teams don't always have the confidence in this. So that's what we're seeing is a little bit more investment when it comes to security. I think there was one.
Yeah,
Going
I'm
back up, I
trying
saw a
to.
security one there.
Yeah.
Keep
Obstacle.
going, huh? I saw it. There
Oh,
it is.
right there we go.
Frequency of
Yep.
API security incidents. So we're seeing more conversation about it here. We're seeing people be more aware of them, but we're seeing a growth in the number of security incidents. And they're oftentimes these really common vulnerabilities and challenges that could be easily caught at design time or during develop time with just some security linting in your API design tooling. So they're easily prevented, The problem is we're producing more and more APIs. Teams, as the report shows, don't always have the breadth of experience. They haven't been around for that last major security break that everyone's talking about. They're a new hire, so investment in the skills as well as automation to help them better secure APIs is pretty top priority.
Yeah, and so this, I guess, kind of touches on also one of the key findings about I guess like outperformance and also like the investments to API as well. But with that said, I wanted to kind of dive into one of the other key findings that we found. I think it was the fourth key finding, which was about remote work. And we're all working remotely today, so I think one thing we can kind of dive into here is maybe the future of work and APIs and the future of work. So some investments and any insights here, I'd be happy to have you guys chime in on.
Sure. Yeah, I'll be happy to talk about this one. This was a new area of focus for the state of the API report this year. The questions about remote work, and so we just asked globally, how important is remote work to you? And if you scroll down a little bit here, you'll see a rainbow colored bar chart. Let's see, a little bit. Let's see here. That's the one. Yep, keep going. There you go. That's remote work is very important. You have it. That's right. Scroll back down a little. Yeah. So what you're looking at here is a chart globally of attitudes around remote work. How important is it to you? Very important, moderately important, not important. And Pooja, if you hover your cursor over these bar charts, you might see some. You'll see that there's like a little legend that pops up that shows you that what you're looking at is differing attitudes. Globally, 72% of respondents said that remote work is very important. That is, they prioritized it the highest level that we offered. You see that it varies. In the US and Canada, it's 78%. At the other end of the spectrum, Asia Pacific, only 61% said that remote work is very important. And we see these different attitudes cropping up in different parts of the world where sort of as the pandemic sort of winds down, tech companies are encouraging their employees to come back to the office. And many tech employees have decided that working from home for them is a better fit, whether it's productivity, whether it's work-life balance, or other reasons. So we find that there are differing attitudes. And we also wanted to ask too, well, okay, how often would you expect to work from home in the coming 12 months, say in a given work week? And we found that globally, 43% of respondents said they expect to work from home every day, every work day. And another 15% expect to work from home 4 days a week. So, if you add those two together, you're talking, roughly 58, almost 60% of people expect to work from home 4 days or more a week. So you have a little bit of a showdown potentially coming, and also actually, on the scene right now between some of the managers and, directors of the company who want people to return to the office, and a lot of people who are not really ready to return to the office. Some of that may be out of convenience of working from home. Some of it may be lingering concerns about the pandemic. And so when we dug a little bit deeper, just to see who, if there was varying attitudes between, say, executives and, say, developers, we did find some difference. For example, executives, just 68% of them said remote work was very important. But if you asked just developer and technical roles, 75% said it's very important. Now, that was kind of interesting. So there's definitely a dichotomy in views. Now, if we look globally, we took a look to see what was the G20 country, the 20 largest economies, what's the G20 country that's least likely to call remote work very important? It turns out it was India, which is a massive producer of APIs and user of APIs. There, only 58% of respondents in India said that remote work is very important. And that compares again with 72% globally. So very different attitudes, in different regions.
Yeah, no, I find that's actually really fascinating how people kind of take development and remote work throughout the world. And it seems like in the API space, it seems like it's pretty prominent for a lot of people. I wanted to take one more dive into one of the other key findings which we have, which is also about the internal API integration is paramount. And I think this key finding actually differed quite heavily from last year's survey as well. So, for example, one thing that I saw in the API first and other strategies section, there was a section on internal internal API integration. So I'd love to kind of get a little bit of insight from that as well, from both of you as well, to talk about that.
Happy to continue. I mean, there's definitely a Venn diagram of, I think, the reasons behind this. We talked about just the general growth in APIs, people needing composable enterprise, but what you're seeing here also is a modernization of systems. Damien talked a little bit about that. Things that were traditional SOA integrations, FTP integrations, flat file. Even we're seeing a lot of EDI. So some of the maybe younger developers here on won't know what EDI is, but EDI is the original API. It was developed in the early 70s, and most of the global economy uses EDI to exchange information, but it's often done through FTP, flat files, XML. Even email sometimes is used as a message vehicle. And so you see a lot of these companies, mainstream companies, insurance companies, financial companies, healthcare companies, being forced to modernize these legacy systems because of external forces, but also internal forces, pushing them to modernize using APIs and microservices. And so this is and the other aspect of this is what I mentioned earlier is this is where they're seeing the low hanging fruit. They need to invest, they need to make it happen, but they have anxiety about externalizing those. And so we're going to continue seeing this modernization of existing systems. And then alongside this, you're also seeing the growth of SaaS. We require a lot more SaaS solutions. This is why Salesforce was the #1 on the popular APIs list. We need to integrate with the increasing number of SaaS solutions that it takes to run our business. More and more of our business is being outsourced to these SaaS solutions, and so we need to stitch them together with our internal systems. And so there's a lot of this internal conversation represents an intersection of a lot of different aspects of how we do business today.
Definitely.
Fascinating. That brings to mind a question, Ken. I don't know if you'd be interested in commenting on. There's a list of the most popular APIs, and you just mentioned Salesforce is at the top of that list, and it's under global growth of APIs. If you go to that section, at the top, and then you scroll down, you'll see an orange horizontal bar chart. That's the one. So Salesforce is at the top, and you talked about the growth of SaaS. But are there any other? And again, just to let people know, what we're looking at. This is looking at the Postman Public API Network, which is the world's largest public API hub, and we're looking at which API collections were forked most over the past year. So, Ken, are there any on here that you think speak to sort of emerging trends in the way companies are doing business involving APIs besides Salesforce? For example, I see Notion is up there pretty high, and that's not quite a household name like, say, Twitter is. Do you have any thoughts on what's going on?
I would say, Notion is used by, I would say, a younger generation of workers who've come into a lot of these COVID kind of transformation jobs, and they're kind of that next generation workforce. And Notion's used to like collaborate and organize and gather notes. And I'm not a heavy Notion user, but I use it because people I work with are using it, and it brings me into it. Deepa is always sharing things with me on Notion and going, hey, check this out. I threw down a bunch of ideas. I organized it into this outline. What do you think before I formalize this? So it's very much represents this kind of new way of collaborative work, work using these SaaS solutions. And you see Slack representing that. You see DocuSign, as we move into this digital world where you don't get physical signatures anymore. I just refinanced my car last week, And they said, with my local credit union, and they said, well, we're not doing, because of COVID, we're not doing in-person signatures anymore. Can we send you DocuSign? Does that work? And I was like, yes, please. Thank you. And so you see, I would say, several things happening across the different kind of trends that we're seeing, that we just talked about in this show, is SaaS integrations, social communication, WhatsApp and Slack. Not on this list, but I know that there's more investment in the network. Recently is Zoom. Zoom is one of the faster growing APIs in there. WhatsApp recently became one of the fast, but it's here on the list. But those sort of communication tooling reflects what we talked about with remote work, and we're all really dependent on Slack and Teams and Zoom right now.
Definitely. And do you feel like the trend for like, I know within the Postman public network, we have like different categories of APIs. I think we have like communication, fintech, finance. So where do you feel like most of what type of APIs are trending upwards in these?
I'm pleasantly
Yeah.
surprised. Like, so what I have open here, the couple that I just discovered. So commerce layer, so composable commerce APIs for developers. That just came up on my radar like 2 days ago. They tweeted out a blog post about theirs. Zoom, I already mentioned, they were talking about their public workspace. Another I came across because I did a Breaking Changes podcast with them is Amadeus. So their travel APIs, and it's not on here. I just recorded it, so it hasn't been put in the schedule, unfortunately. But
Nice.
is they have hotel, airlines, transit, travel APIs, and so I'm really pleasantly surprised because that's commerce, that's communications, and that's travel and transportation. So like, it's a diverse range of APIs that I see emerging in the network, and it's really become, because we have 20 million developers and we have over 500,000 companies using Postman and the Postman API network. It's become kind of how I keep track of what's trending and what's cool out there, and I'm always pleasantly surprised.
Yeah, we have Marcel in the chat that's mentioned that fintech is definitely going to be one of the big trends that we see. And
Absolutely.
It is.
I'm glad Marcel brought that up because I wanted to share some new figures I have that aren't in the State of the API report, but that are from the same survey. We have a lot more data than we actually published in the State of the API report. And Pooja, if you go to who works with APIs section, and then you'll want to scroll down to a yellow vertical bar chart. That's the one industry right back up there.
right here.
You'll see that if you look over just from the left to right, the third bar you see there is banking, finance, and insurance. And they're really one to watch, fintech and just financial services in general, because we found when we broke down the respondents just by, say, people from banking, finance, insurance, financial services for short, we found that they were the likeliest among all the different sectors to say that most of their company's development effort was spent working with APIs. You might remember that we said 51% overall of respondents said most of their effort is working with APIs. In the financial services industry, it's 58%. And that's the highest we have among all the sectors. So they are going great guns on working with APIs.
Right.
Also, we found that financial services was the sector most likely to predict an increase in API investments over the next 12 months. Among all respondents, 53% said we think there's going to be an increase in API investments over the next 12 months. With financial services, it was 60% who said we're going to increase our investments into APIs. And then the last thing that I'll leave you with is that financial services respondents were the most likely to rank themselves as API first leaders. That is, remember, a 9 or a 10 on that 0 to 10 scale.
Yeah.
The average figure among all respondents was about 8%. But in financial services, it was 10%, and that was the highest for any sector. So that's definitely a sector to watch as far as their uptake and use of APIs.
Definitely. And
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Sorry.
I was just going to.
I can second.
Go ahead. Go ahead, kid.
You go, Ken.
No, I was just going to add a second that I'm seeing the same thing on Breaking Changes to support what Damien just said.
Thanks for bringing that up, Marcel. And I won't, wherever you are in the world, that's great.
that was definitely a good insight. And I just wanted to welcome Deepa and Rebecca back. Welcome back.
Thank you. All
Yeah.
is good here. All clear here now.
Awesome. Yeah, we were just talking about API trends and industries, different trending categories. And, we talked a little bit about the fintech industries. Any thoughts on major API trends, Deepa, Rebecca, from your end?
Oh, in fintech, I would think especially.
Absolutely. Fintech, I would love to jump into that. So banking and finance in general has been a big uh, producer and consumer of APIs, and in the last few years, we've definitely seen a lot of increase in interest in fintech. Particularly, if you see, especially in markets like India, where there has been a tremendous growth in fintech companies, a lot of innovation going on in terms of payments, fintech products. So that's one of the things that's really driving that growth in the fintech space. And I think, uh, of course, there's a lot of players like PayPal, of course, that have been around and been doing APIs for a long time. They have a much more enterprise level understanding of APIs, but there's also a lot of small players now. Another interesting thing about industry specific things is what they're interested in. So, for example, for fintech, banking, finance, or healthcare, uh, and we see that people are very interested in security, for example. These are heavily regulated spaces. And what we see is priorities for different industries is slightly different depending on the nature of the industry. Like marketing APIs might be a little different than banking finance APIs. So what customers need in terms of what drives customer decision varies industry to industry, but ultimately everybody's moving towards APIs for that uh, fast growth and trying to capitalize on that opportunity right now.
For sure.
Definitely.
Yeah, for sure, Deepa. As far as security goes, you're absolutely right that that's a big concern for the financial service sector. When we asked all industries, to rank your top priorities, 54% of respondents said that security was a top priority. But when we narrowed it down to just the financial services sector, it was 65%. And that was a higher rating as far as valuing security than any other sector. So that's something that really is going to be really primary for them when working with APIs.
I wanted to dive a little bit into talking about like skills. I feel like now that we've kind of talked about trends, we've talked about, who works with APIs, the people, remote work. Let's kind of dive a little bit into some of the skills needed in this new economy, and what we're kind of seeing in terms of like future work and things like that. So when I look at like the I guess the it's in the API technologies section. So it looks like we have lots of different technologies, but we have a section on learning about technologies as well, and some of the skills that are needed in this new ecosystem. So I'd love to like have a discussion on that as well.
One of the things I want to start with here is if you see the experience level of people who work with APIs, we've seen that there's about 76% people who have less than 5 years of experience.
Mm-hmm.
So generally, APIs space tends to be really young, and people are still in that experience level where they're still developing a lot of the skills. So I'm sure a lot of people are thinking about what skills they need, considering we do see a lot more younger folks. In fact, I think we had 77% distribution of the users was actually Gen Z and millennials.
Yeah.
Gen Z being like really early in their careers. So I think uh, the skill question is very important for all of that
audience.
Absolutely.
Definitely.
I would love to know from Ken, where if you were going to work on certain skills with your API skills, in an area maybe where there's a real lack of qualified candidates and talent, I'm wondering if API design skills might rank highly among them, because in our survey we found that that was the third biggest obstacle to producing APIs, and that was a new finding.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, design skills are one of those that have such a huge downstream effect, meaning poor design causes problems with documentation, it causes problems with security. So it really is the kind of the tip of the iceberg when it comes to the important things you can be doing with your APIs. And I think there's a huge opportunity right now with this. I mean, the response in the report actually surprises me a little bit, because when I talk to a lot of folks, there's a lot of folks who are investing in design first, but there's still also a lot of pushback from existing teams who are anti-design first. We're code first. We're programmers. We're not designers. But I'm starting to see, as I talked about before, more product managers involved in the conversation, more business stakeholders, more need and demand for business alignment. So it's starting to change this culture and soften this tone. And I think with new people entering in the space, whether they be technical or non-technical, I think teaching them design skills, not that they're going to learn every nuance of RESTful API design, but what makes a good API? What design goes into an API that's used? Like, get familiar with the way Stripe does, and the way Stripe designs its API, but also talks about how they design their API. Same with Twilio. So when it comes to your new hires, your new folks, introducing them to API design and then immersing them in that world is an excellent place to start.
Yeah, I wanted to pull up this one metric from API technologies on like how people are learning about API technologies. So it seems like a lot of people are learning, of course, like in working in the space, but it seems like we're seeing a pretty big upturn from like online resources and things like that. So feel free to share any thoughts there. But I know
One of
we
the things,
yeah, go ahead.
so one of the things I feel, adding to what Kim just said about design, is people also, not every person has to learn about API design itself, but I think people still have to learn about what the impact of good and bad design is. So there's the downstream impact, which can, for example, if you're just somebody working on API documentation, then you have to understand a little bit of design to understand what are the experience problems that are being caused by the design versus not. And also, as a consumer, sometimes you have to understand design to be able to use APIs more effectively. And so I think there is a lot of downstream impact of thinking about design. That's where the education is needed in terms of how do you, as a support, as a success or customer support person, how do you deal with APIs? How do you understand the design of an API? As a salesperson, how do you do it? As a solution architect, you have to understand design to piece together better solutions. So everybody has a role to play, and it all ultimately leads from the design of the API. And that's also where, in terms of learning, we need more content out there in various different formats that addresses those gaps. I think a lot of content out there right now is very focused on the technical side of designing itself, but I think there is more needed for the enablement side of it.
Definitely. And I feel like this segues really into like API governance as well. So I'd love to just talk about governance and thoughts on governance and, just start chatting about that as in general, and the importance of it as APIs are designed in space.
I'm happy to kick things off in context of this chart here. Is there's more leadership involvement in the API strategy and lifecycle, and governance is very important in these conversations amongst leadership, and specifically the consistency in the design and security and testing and documentation of our API. So consistently, when an API is developed, no matter what team, when it comes out of a company, they look and they behave in similar ways. They're well documented, they're tested, they're reliable. Those are all governance things that are of major concern to leadership. Now, the flip side of that is on the ground floor, not many folks care about governance. They more care about the enabling factors that governance puts in place for them is that'll help them do the right thing when that time comes. So developers aren't consciously putting in security problems into their APIs or designing them inconsistently. They're doing the best they can with what they have, the skills they've been given, the tools they've been given. So governance to them is really about enabling them to do the right thing and make the right decision on the ground floor.
Yeah, and like with that said, I'd love to get some thought on like how can companies like enable people on governance, or like how do you learn about like what the best practices are there? Yeah.
Well, there's the leading open source standard for governance is called Spectral. It's an open source solution out of Stoplight, and we've just adopted that, and in our version 10 release coming out this month. Oh yeah, it is this month. It's September 1st, Rebecca. Oh man, I just had a whole lot of anxiety all of a sudden. I was like, it's still August in my head. Anyways. Governance is coming out this month, and we've supported Spectral rules, and what this is that enablement that I talked about, but it's top down in governance, enabling developers to do the right thing. So Spectral rules are just these simple little YAML. I'm not spoiling anything, Arlemy. It's well known. But Spectral rules are these little YAML rules that you can describe a specific problem or issue or thing that happens during the design process that you want to control. For example, all of your parameters should be snake case or camel case, a specific casing. So you can create a rule that will check your open API and make sure and let you know if any of your parameters don't meet this this requirement. And these are really helpful things because someone like me who totally understands that, knows that I should be consistent in how I structure my parameters. I come into work on just the wrong day. I'm not thinking. I start making the parameters and I don't think about it. These rules can then be applied at design time as I'm designing that API and give me little warnings and say, hey, these parameters don't comply. And then those rules can follow me through the development process. They can follow me as I'm developing, mocking, documenting. Anytime I'm using a Postman collection, I can apply and see these rules. And these rules aren't just for design things. We have OWASP top 10. So this is how we shift security left as well. So at design time, I can start thinking about making sure that I'm doing all of the things I need to do to mitigate the OWASP top 10 security challenges and friction that I'm going to encounter. And so these rules can be defined centrally. They can be defined by architects and business and technical leadership. They can new rules can be added anytime you encounter a problem in production. Make a rule, and then we can catch that during design time and develop time in the future. And these rules accumulate. And there's also a learning opportunity with each of these rules. You can each rule you can learn more about the rule, what it does, why it's necessary, how to why it matters beyond what you're just working on, maybe to documentation or security. And so these rules give us the ability to kind of automate some of the most common friction and challenges that we're going to encounter and help enable teams to be more successful in their work. And then lastly, these rules can be applied in the CI/CD pipeline. So if you choose, it's not always recommended for all APIs and all teams, but you can enforce these rules so no API goes into production unless it passes all of the rules. So with the V10 release, governance is really a top priority for the platform, and making sure you're thinking about this consistency from design all the way to deployment.
Definitely. And with that said, I would, definitely recommend anyone who is definitely interested in that to join the wait list to get, firsthand access and to some of these V10 features and get some more insight as well. So that's definitely something that is like on in almost here, very coming very soon. And I think Kin really talked about these rules that really help with API design and learning as well. So
If I can add some enterprise lens to that.
sure.
So one of the things that happens is at an enterprise level, you have a lot of developers that are moving teams or
Yeah.
joining new teams. And there is just so much back and forth that happens as a developer joins, goes through a development cycle only to get like feedback on little things like
Right.
demo case or things like that can very well be something that they could be told before.
Right.
So there's a lot of back and forth that can be avoided by giving that information upfront, and that's really the goal of the API governance, is like thinking through some of these things so that developers can be more productive, they can be enabled to do the work that they need, whatever instructions they need. And also in terms of once you have an API, you have a system for how it is made discoverable, because it's not just public APIs, even internally you need to make APIs discoverable. So how do they need to be published internally or to partners? And having all those best practices and guidance in place becomes really important when enterprises are building thousands and thousands of APIs. They have hundreds of developers. So you don't want them to be duplicating work. You don't want them to have so much back and forth. You want to enable them to be able to work independently and have this standardized set of information that they can reference. So yeah, really excited about governance, and it's really something that enterprise customers, internal enterprises are really keen on.
Yeah, definitely. With that said, I feel like we have about 10 minutes left. So I feel like we've had a great conversation. We've kind of weaved through this entire state of the API report. For those of you who are interested in some of we haven't even touched on, I don't even think we touched on all of these metrics yet. There's so much data to be consumed. But we definitely touched on some of these 6 key findings. So with that said, I wanted to kind of point out to ask everyone that is on the panel today, like, what was one of the most interesting key findings for each of you, and why? And we can start with Deepa and go down the road. So yeah.
Absolutely. I think the finding that really stood out to me was probably how we still have about 85% men in this space. I think the lack of representation of women and non-binary people really stood out to me. It was higher than I expected. And I think that's something that's a topic that's very very close to my heart. I really want to enable more women to get into tech, get into APIs. So that one was definitely very interesting to me.
All right, I'll go next. So I think one of the reasons, and Damien, I'm going to apologize if I'm stealing your thunder here. But to me, number one, developers are spending most of their time on APIs. That's something that that's a question we had really kind of started asking in that way a couple of years back. And to see that jump from 40% to 49% to 51%, and that trend over the few years, and now APIs, really, kind of dominate development effort. To me, that's probably the most fascinating and indicative of where future efforts are headed. We expect to see that trend continue. So I think that was what was most interesting to me.
Yeah, and I found that interesting too, because even this year we've gotten 10,000 more people taking the survey as well. So it seems like in comparison of like the history of this survey, it seems like more and more people in the API space are getting engaged as well. So that was definitely an interesting finding as well.
Yeah, and by the way, that's why we put it number one.
Yeah.
Kind of really spotlight that finding.
Yeah, definitely. Damien?
Yeah, for me, to me the most surprising finding was just how committed organizations are to increasing or maintaining their level of investments into APIs. Because 2/3 of respondents said that the economy currently is not so good or poor, and yet at the same time, 89% of respondents said that they're going to increase their level of investments in APIs, or at least keep them the same. So that shows to me that APIs really are a priority when it comes to deploying capital in an organization. What was also interesting too was that when we narrowed our survey responses on API investments to just C-suite, we had 1,400 or so CEOs, CIOs, and CTOs. They also had a similar level of confidence that investments into APIs are going to stay the same or increase in the next 12 months. So I was surprised to see that even when there may be some belt tightening going on, APIs are going to remain a priority.
Yeah. And what about you, Ken? What was one of the most interesting findings?
For me, it's the number 6, the lack of API design skills, a top problem. Not that it isn't. I agree with the findings, but just again, that what I see on the ground floor is I see a lot of very vocal developers who are code first, pushing back and on design first efforts. So I see lots of design first efforts within organizations, but I would say the biggest challenge those teams face is getting adoption of that approach across many teams. So like a handful of teams will be design first, and they're championing that and trying to grow, but then they encounter pitchforks and torches and pushback from other teams who are entrenched as code first. And so to see it grow year over year so much, so significantly, that it's one of the biggest problems, makes me happy, because design first is definitely, I think, where we're going to move things into a healthier territory. And it just leaves me a little more hopeful about what next year is going to look like.
Definitely. Yeah, I'm actually really excited to see how this year's report changes to next year. And it seems like year to year, what do you think is like one of the biggest change and trends, I think, when it comes to APIs, from like pandemic time to now to the future of maybe the next 5 years?
For me, it's just the number of the people who are waking up to it. Because
Yeah.
when I started in 2010 and I was on an airplane explaining what I do, no one had a clue, and just looked at me like I was a weirdo. I mean, they still do, but now just business people get it. They understand the value. They may not understand the technical details of it, but just seeing the growth in the number of business stakeholders and other people in this conversation is what's important to me. But Rebecca, what's going to be our goal next year for number of respondents? What's your crystal ball? 50,000?
50,000, yeah. When we started as the largest survey, this is the 4th year, we had, I'm trying to think, somewhere between 10 and 13,000 respondents. And we've seen that steadily rise each year. So assuming that trend also continues, I think we'll see that cross the 50,000. And I'd say, kind of tacking on to what trends do you see? I think going back to something Ken said earlier around, we're going to see partner, usage of partner and public APIs really explode. I foresee that too. Because you think about the problems that are fun, or from what I hear from developers, problems that are fun to solve. If somebody else has already solved that problem, and I can just use a partner API or a public API, feed that in, and then I get to focus on the fun new thing to solve. That's gonna open me up to be more productive, to get more done, to reach bigger, better outcomes faster. So I think we're gonna see that kind of continue into next year. And we already saw indicators with API first, kind of that API first leaders were more likely to use public and partner APIs than internal APIs. So that's gonna be a fascinating trend to watch.
There's a lot of value in like using an API somebody has already built, because you're not reinventing the wheel, which really reduces your time to market. So that's really where the value kicks in. Is Uber didn't have to invent Google Maps; they can just use Google Maps API, get to market really quickly.
Right, right.
Apply that to any and every industry, and people can build faster. People can build more complicated, more advanced things, and really innovate in terms of the value they drive for the customer.
Definitely. I find that really fascinating as well. It's like there's no longer this reinvention of the wheel, but then the possibilities of what you can do with APIs are absolutely endless. And I think that's a really, really cool thing to look forward to, of like what can be developed. So this was such a wonderful conversation. I wanted to thank you all for being part of today's State of the API report discussion. I feel like we got a lot out of it, and glad to see that Deepa and Rebecca, you're okay in the office as well. But
actually, Kusha, if I could add one last plug.
Yeah, sure.
So we actually encourage folks to share the report. There's even like very lightweight instructions on the state of the API and how to share the report. It's pretty minimal in terms of, we just ask folks to not totally reproduce, right? But like, I think this, if there is a piece in here that helps you in your day-to-day, maybe drive a conversation with somebody else on another team, with your own team, with your business or technical leadership, feel free to drop it into your presentations, take it, use it for kind of whatever helps you kind of push your conversation forward. You absolutely have that freedom to do so.
Definitely. And for also, I know we talked a lot about skills and ramping up your API skills. So we have in the Postman Learning Center so many different ways that you can kind of ramp up your API knowledge. We have Postman Space Camp, which allows, these are webinars and educational trainings taught by dev advocates. We have one that is coming up soon, which is unboxing what's new. So this will be a little bit about V10. I know we gave a few spoilers on this session, but this one definitely be on a lookout for unboxing what's new. That's going to come out later this month, and lots of different opportunities to learn, and a lot of other upcoming events throughout September into the fall. So I just wanted to thank everyone again for joining, and feel free to stay in touch and stay in tune with all that we're doing here. Anyone have any last remarks before we end the stream?
I just wanted to say thanks for everybody who joined us, of course, but also thanks to all the many, many tens of thousands of people who filled out the State of the API survey. We wouldn't have this report without the great contribution of all these tens of thousands of people. And it's not a short survey, it takes 15 minutes, but people were really willing to give us their time and their thoughts, and we're really grateful.
Definitely, yeah. And it's great that everyone was able to provide their insights for everyone else to get some more insights. So thank you, everyone. I hope you had fun, and I look forward to collaborating with you all in the future. And thank you for joining this stream.
Thanks.
And thanks for everyone who joined online. So we'll see you guys soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.